It is 20 years since Arundhati Roy released her Booker Prize-winning novel, The God of Small Things. She went on to write non-fiction on numerous topics like India's nuclear programme, its massive dam-building projects and the Kashmir conflict. And now she has released her second novel, The Ministry of Utmost Happiness. Arundhati, welcome to the programme.
Thank you. Thank you.
The only aerobics teacher ever to have won the Booker Prize. It did make me laugh when you said that. But of course it is so much more than that, because you were the only Indian living in India to ever have won it as well. What did that mean to you?
Well, I'm not really somebody who thinks in terms of countries, And so when I won it, it was a very uncomfortable time in India because, of course, it was just months before the nuclear tests, and I was being sort of marketed, if you like, as this global Indian on the stage of the emerging economy and the new nuclear power, and I was pretty uncomfortable with all the things that were happening at the time. So I think I ended up sort of making people who thought of me as that, the first Indian and the first Indian woman to win the Booker Prize, where, the people who were more interested in the prize than the book, if you like, who were pretty disappointed with the way I turned out.
Yes, you blotted your copybook right at the very beginning,
Right.
to say the very least, didn't you? And very deliberately. That decision that you came to very, very soon after winning the Booker to take a stand against the government and its nuclear programme. Tell me how you came to that decision, knowing, I'm sure, full well exactly what it would mean.
Well, I was, in any case, a little taken aback at the extent of, the fame and being on every magazine cover and so on. I wasn't really prepared for that kind of thing. And then very soon after that, this right-wing Hindu nationalist government came to power, and the first thing it did was to conduct these nuclear tests. And what that led to was a sort of outpouring of very ugly nationalist rhetoric from even the most surprising quarters. And in fact, to me, that was a watershed moment, and it is the moment when what was acceptable to be said publicly changed for the worse. And there was no possibility for me to have said nothing and not be included in that party, in that celebration, in that what I thought was just unacceptable stuff, So I knew that I had to distance myself from it if I was not to be co-opted by it. So I wrote this essay called The End of Imagination, which, of course, just changed the course in which my life went. Changed it more dramatically even than winning the Booker Prize, actually.
Well, that's it. That's what I was thinking, because you went from being the darling of modern India to becoming an enemy of the state, as it were, almost overnight. And in the intervening 20 years between The God of Small Things and this wonderful new book, The Ministry of Utmost Happiness, you kept going. You kept going with your thoughts and your passions on a political level.
Yeah, I mean, either I kept going or they kept going, I mean, it was suddenly something changed, and the essays that I wrote led me further and further afield, and it wasn't that each of them was a cause or an issue or something like that. Each of them was, for me, a deepening of a worldview, of another way of seeing, and of sometimes urgently intervening in situations that were closing down very frighteningly for very, very vulnerable people. So in a way, those 20 years, every time I would write something and get into so much trouble, I would swear not to do it again, and then I would, it would just happen. So they were just just written when it was easier to write than to keep quiet, because the situation was really moving very fast into a place where, of course, it is now, which is terrifying.
I ask this honestly and not in a flippant way, but how angry are you on a daily basis?
I don't think that, especially in this time, all of us feel several things simultaneously, So it's not that I have just one single emotion, which is anger. There's also, there's also delight. There's also, sitting down on the street and just laughing madly at something that you see. And yet, surely the overwhelming feeling right now is one of anger and great apprehension, because we are living in a moment where every day in the papers we're reading about mobs lynching Muslims, lynching Dalits, watched by the police, flogging Dalits on the streets. Everybody who isn't with the program of Hindu nationalism is being taught a lesson. Kashmiris last summer were being blinded by pellet guns. This summer, a Kashmiri man was tied to it's not the worst thing the army has done, but publicly, tied to a jeep and used as a human shield, and the officer who did it was awarded for gallantry, and everybody was asked to participate in this spectacle of nationalism, and many did. So we are in a very, very dangerous situation right now in India.
You mentioned Dalits there, and for those that don't know, while the caste system was supposed to have been abolished many years ago, the Dalits are what used to be called the untouchables.
The caste system is too entrenched to be abolished by any kind of legalese, It's the engine that runs modern India. And we are a society that has created an institutionalized hierarchy that many believe is part of Hinduism itself. So I always say that it's incredible that we have so many experts, so many Indologists, so many Indian leftists and liberals who manage to write what appear to be knowledgeable theses and works and academic works and novels and everything about India without understanding caste, which is really the engine that runs this country.
All the while that you've been writing about this and getting yourself into trouble, has the other writer in you, the fiction writer, been there bubbling away all the time?
Certainly. I think that even the essays, the non-fiction essays that I wrote, there is the skills or the sensibilities of a fiction writer at play there, because they are all telling stories. And as I keep saying, fiction is truth. But say when I started traveling to Kashmir, I knew at once, like even after my first visit, that the only way to tell the truth about Kashmir is through fiction, because it's not enough to just count the gravestones, of which there are tens of thousands, some of them double-deckered. It's not enough to just talk about the unmarked graves. It's not enough to just give numbers of the disappeared. The point is, this is a place which is the most densely occupied military zone in the world. It has been so for 20 years. What does it do to people to live under that boot for that long? What does it do to the minds of people who don't know whether their children will come home and when they'll ever see them? Will they be shot on their way to school? Will they be blinded? What does it mean to have hundreds of tens of thousands of young men who have been brutally tortured, who have lost their minds, some of them, with what is going on there? You can't tell this story in human rights reports and footnotes, and the terror is not just of atrocities that you can count. It's the quality of the air that people breathe. And it's not just about Kashmir, it's also about India. How do we as citizens accept that level of horror, digest it, and even celebrate it? And then with what face do we talk about things that are happening to us, if we are prepared to accept that kind of thing happening to other people? And it's not just Kashmir. There hasn't been a day since 1947 when the Indian Army has not been deployed within the borders of the country against its so-called own people. Whether it's Nagaland, Manipur, Assam, Punjab, Kashmir, Hyderabad, the Naxalites. There's been a lot of death which has flown under the radar, and, the cuddly, friendly, Bollywoody democracy reigns. But it's untrue.
I can't remember who it was that said fiction is the lie through which we tell the truth, but it seems that's what you're driving at in this novel, and the conflict in Kashmir does feature in it. But it is essentially the story of lots of people, but there are two women at the heart of this. Tell us a little bit about those two women.
The two women, one is Anjum, who is born in the walled city called Shahjahanabad, the walled city of Delhi, to Shia Muslim parents. Her father claims descent from Genghis Khan, and she is born as Aftab, and then her mother discovers that she's actually a hermaphrodite, and she tries to kind of hide that from her husband for a long time, but then eventually by the time Aftab is 15, he moves out of the house to a close by place, also within the walls of the walled city.
The House of Dreams.
Khwabgah, the House of Dreams, where he lives with a community of what are in Urdu called hijras, who are actually many kinds of people. There are Shias, there are Sunni, there are Christians, there are Hindus, there are men who want to be women, there are women, there are men who have had surgery,
yes.
Transitional
in those days, surgery, yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
But, in those days, very, very painful and badly done, and then there are those who just want to be men dressed as women. There are Muslims who don't believe in doing the surgery, so live with their God-given bodies. The only people missing, of course, are women who want to be men. So those are not allowed in there. Somehow, but otherwise it's a diverse world who live together, and they actually think of the world, they refer to the world as the dunya, which is something separate from them and their lives. But Anjum, at one point, she finds a little girl abandoned on the steps of the Jama Masjid, and Zainab, and she falls in love, and she deeply wants to be a mother, and she adopts her and loves her and sings to her and so on. But then in 2002, she goes with an old Muslim gentleman who's a friend of her father's to Gujarat. She goes to Ajmer and then to Gujarat, where she gets caught up in the pogrom that happened in 2002, in which thousands of Muslims were murdered, women were raped and burnt alive. And actually, she gets caught up in the pogrom because she's a Shia and a Muslim, but she escapes because she's a hijra, because they think that it's bad luck to kill hijras. And she returns obviously traumatized and damaged, and little Zainab, with the mercilessness of children, sort of transfers her affection to someone else
in the house. And that is one of the saddest bits for me, is that line where she says she doesn't want to sleep in the room with her anymore, with Anjum, and says she's too unhappy.
She says, "Mummy is never happy."
Yeah.
And then
I thought of you, when I read that, because of all the things that, your mother is so famous and looms so large in your life, and we haven't talked about her yet, and I'd love to. And I just wondered if that little voice was you ever at any point, because she was quite bitter sometimes, your mum.
She was. But there are many, there are many moments in the book when I'm sure it's me. I mean, some of them are moments like those, but others too. Sometimes I'm Anjum, the one who she burns all her press clippings and puts the ash on her face. Sort of, she's also famous. She becomes
the most famous Hijra.
Yeah, and then she feels trapped in that, and she burns it, and then she moves to a graveyard, where Which is where the book starts. But the other woman is called S. Tilotma, and she like Anjum too has an incendiary border running through her. Anjum's is the border of gender. Tilotma is a border of caste, where her mother is a sort of elite Syrian Christian, comes from an elite Syrian Christian family, but clearly
your mother also is a Syrian Christian, we should point out. Yeah.
Yes, and Tilo, for me, Tilotma, who's called Tilo, in some ways she's notionally, for me, the child of Ammu and Veluta from The God of Small Things, had their story ended differently, So notionally, the fictional younger sibling of Esteban and Rahel, and so she's the other main character, but all the characters in some ways have these incendiary borders running through them. There's a character called Saddam, who calls himself Saddam Hussein, who's a Dalit, who again watches his father being beaten to death by a Hindu mob and then converts to Islam and calls himself Saddam Hussein. There's Musa, who's a Kashmiri, who also has the borders of obviously nationalism, two different nations running through him.
How do you keep track of them all these people that are living with you all the time over these years while you're writing this book?
Not at all difficult, To me, I really wanted to write a book in which there were a lot of people, it wasn't just, because I think the novel, I wanted to see how far I could push the borders of it to contain the craziness, not just of lots of people, but like I was telling you, there isn't a moment that is a moment anymore. You're either getting a text message or someone's trying to sell you something, or all these things are going on. So it's like living in a city, in a city where somehow all the time things are intruding on each of them, and they are drifting towards each other in ways, and it's like the map of a city where you have big roads and then you have small roads and you have blind alleys and you have unauthorized people and citizens who are not considered citizens, and so in a way the assault on us at all times, I didn't want to simplify that.
Can I ask you what it's like to be back in England, Arundhati Roy, at the moment, given what's been happening here, which I'm sure you're very aware of over the last few weeks and months? Terror attacks, 3 of them in 3 months, and now right in the teeth of a general election. What's it like for you being here?
It's very, very, well, disturbing, and I'm fascinated to know how the elections are going to go here. And you see how, countries which were in themselves insulated from the world are losing that insulation, especially in Europe, in London, in Paris. And somehow the everything that's going on in the world and all the wars that are going on, there's no way of insulating the insanity that is being created by all that violence. So it's very disturbing, and most disturbing is really not knowing how you come out of this cycle.
I think a lot of people are feeling that way at the moment, not knowing how we get out of this cycle.
Yeah.
I mean, it's been the subject of really countless debates on this programme and many others across all broadcast networks over the last few weeks and months. Everybody is currently searching for answers. Listen, we mentioned your mum earlier. I came across a piece with your mother, an interview with your mother, I think for the Times of India. And it's about when you, her obvious pride in you for writing the book, The God of Small Things, and becoming so successful. But it says, Arundhati told me that some parts of the book would hurt me, so I didn't read it for a long time till my daughter came over and she read the book aloud to me. And then the quote is, "But I don't give a damn. I'm an honest woman who has lived my life openly." Does that sound very much like your mother?
Yeah. She has never given a damn, and that's wonderful about her, you know. And yet she's been such a interesting and incorrigible, uncommon and wild presence in my life that, surely we hurt each other a lot, and yet we embrace each other too. And as a writer, I cannot ever exclude that, somehow that influence from what I write, because it is somehow fundamental to the way I in India, everybody's a walking barcode. If you know their name, you know what caste, what state, what region, what language, what everything you know. And in my case, you just don't know, because I'm one of those very few Indians who's just a mixture of things, and grew up in this extremely unorthodox way.
Where you were always an outsider.
Always an outsider, and yet, even if you're a Dalit, you have a community, even if it's oppressed, So, but in my case, it's just that you're just off the grid. Like, it's not that you're oppressed or that you've...
Why were you off the grid? Explain that to us.
Off the grid because my mother, whose family was a Syrian Christian family, married a Hindu from Bengal, then divorced him, came back. I grew up not knowing, never having set eyes on anything known as a father, So grew up without any idea of one half of me, where it came from. But the Syrian Christian community, very traditional, very entitled, made it very clear to me from the very, very beginning. I mean, from the time I was 2 years old, 3 years old, or whatever it was, 5 years old, that I was not part of it.
An uncle showed you a bauble at 3 years of age and says, "Do you want this?" And you said, "Of course I do." And he said, "I'll give it to you if you fail."
Yes. He was very much the inspiration for Charco in The God of Small Things. He was a Rhodes Scholar who gave up everything to make pickles, and to even fail at that in the village that I grew up in. But he was a brilliant man, in this crazy way. And he did that, and it really had a very profound impact on me, because I began to think about failure a lot from the time I was very young as something interesting, and it sort of just flips your brain around.
It's almost like you are more comfortable with it as a concept than you are with success.
Yes, I think even as a writer, what kind of a character would someone who's very famous and successful be? So I'm a little bit repulsed by myself sometimes.
Take 5 Live on the go. On digital, online, smartphone and tablet. Afternoon edition.
Arundhati Roy. released her Booker Prize-winning novel, The God of Small Things, 20 years ago. Huge success, 8 million odd copies, and I know so many of you adored it with a real zeal, you know. The people that loved that book, Arundhati, you know, there's a kind of evangelical glint in their eye. I mean, there's people in this building that have come up to me today going, oh, I can't believe we're interviewing Arundhati Roy. What was it about that book that you think spoke to so many people?
I've always sort of preferred not to understand or wonder about it, you know, because I think
must wonder, sort of 8 million people,
mysterious things, you know, that happen with art and music and books, and I don't think one will ever really know accurately what it was.
Yeah, everybody, I think, listening would have a million different reasons why it was. When I say to you modern India, what does that mean to you?
It means, well, the image that comes to my mind is like a couple of trucks moving one way and then a whole convoy moving another way, you know. So sort of two very, very different things. One floating up somewhere on to the top of the world, and the other sinking into a very frightening place.
When people say poverty in India has been halved in the last number of years, that millions have been lifted out of poverty with a burgeoning and newly opened economy, how do you react to that?
I would contest it, you know, because it's true that a new middle class was created, and they are better off, millions of people, but somehow that has come at the cost of many millions more being pushed down, you know, and also the temporariness of it, because the devastation of the environment and the forests and the rivers on which millions of people's livelihoods depend, the dropping of the water tables, these are, you know, so even temporary gains can have very serious consequences later. And there's a very, very short-sighted view of these things right now.
It's interesting. I mean, even in the opening page of your book, first of all, the reader is met in the first few sentences with this wonderful lyricism, and then you describe this beautiful white-backed vulture, and then it goes into a very straightforward, point-by-point, almost journalistic dissection of why these animals are all dying, which is as a result of feeding off carcasses of cows that have been given a particular medication to make them better milkers.
Yes.
And for me, that encapsulates your writing now, because it is both. It is the beautiful fiction and it is the causes that you feel so passionately about. But talking about that widening middle class, aren't you part of that? And if you are you embarrassed by it?
No, of course I'm a part of it, and you know, you can't be embarrassed by it, because what is the option that you go and pretend that you're poor and live in a mud house with a handloom sari? That's as false, you know. So whatever you are because you had the fortune of being educated. I, of course, had the good fortune of writing a book that sold 8 million copies, but that doesn't mean that I have to approve of the laws and the economy that is creating this kind of poverty. You know, there's no connection between that, and I'm not embarrassed about being middle class. I would be embarrassed if I kept quiet about the system that is generating this kind of destruction. Are
you more fueled, though, to do it because you've had a relatively privileged upbringing and life?
I'm actually, it's not that I'm more fueled to do it, but I'm freer to do it because I'm economically independent. I mean, not all middle class people are. I mean, even the big Bollywood stars who have, you know, like 99,000 times more money than me, or even, let's say, editors or, you know, journalists in India, all of them earn much more than than me, you know. But the thing is that they are not free because they still have to, in so many ways, you know, their earnings are complicated by needing people's approval and so on. Whereas I, because of the peculiar ways in which I am financially independent, I'm really free to voice my opinion.
You've also said that because you don't have children, that you can be more reckless.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, I have had the responsibility of bringing up children, but yes, I mean, I didn't have children because I know that there is that part of me which is very reckless in terms of saying something. And many women, in fact, if you look at many women in India, almost everyone I can think of who's an activist has made that decision because they don't know what will happen to them next. And it's also because, you know, the ways in which marriage and having children works there, I think everywhere in the world, but especially over there, it sort of ties women down. Somehow their spirits are curbed, you know.
There's hope amidst the darkness in the Ministry of Utmost Happiness, and there's lots of humour. What is your hope for India? What does it look like?
Well, you know, my hope right now is that if you look at the modern history of India, let's say starting from the 1920s, what we are seeing right now, this kind of orgy of Hindu right-wing nationalism, in a way, we had to go through it, you know, because the organization called the RSS, to which the Prime Minister and many ministers belong, was set up in 1925, inspired by Mussolini's black shirts. And they have systematically worked for almost 100 years now to arrive at this place and worked very hard. You know, I disagree with everything they say, but you have to admit that they've worked very hard.
Got to admire their work ethic.
My God, you know.
Okay.
And there are hundreds of thousands of volunteers and people, and they have, you know, they are in every institution.
And they're very popular.
Yeah, and they're very popular. So, in a way, looking at it historically, I think it was inevitable that we go through this convulsion, this way of sort of almost dripping venom into the bloodstream about everyone who disagrees with the idea of the Hindu nation, you know. But maybe we'll come out of it stronger, but I don't know. I can't say that I'm sure about that, you know.
On digital and online.
This is BBC Radio 5.